Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar brought to you by NQA. This afternoon we're going to be looking at ISO 50001 and ESOS and how the two are linked together. I noticed from the delegate list that quite a few of you already know NQA, and some of you I recognise the businesses that you're from that I've probably been in and assessed you at some point. But just a little bit of background about NQA. We are a global certification body now, with offices predominantly in and around London, Boston, Bangalore in India and Shanghai, and presences in all the other areas where you see dots on the screen. We are UCAS accredited in the UK, and in the States we are accredited by We've been around for over 25 years, and in fact this year, later on, will be our 30th year. We started assessing in 1988, so we've plenty of experience. We employ in the UK over 40 now full-time assessors, and we have a team of over 100 associates who help out and bring, in some cases, areas of specialism that we don't employ fully. I've been at NQA for 10 years, and I'm now the principal assessor for environment and energy. In each of the main sectors that we're assessing now, we have appointed a principal assessor who takes the lead technically in that sector. And my background previously for 14 years at environmental charity Groundwork has meant that I now have this role of looking at energy and environment. So I've probably 23, 24 years history of working solely in the environment and energy sector. I'm hoping to speak for about 35, 40 minutes, and then there will be the opportunity to answer questions. There's no need to frantically copy down everything I write. We're making a recording of this presentation, and also you will all be sent copies of the slides as well. We have everybody's email address, and when you logged on, we recorded that, and so you will all get a copy of the slides and the link to our YouTube channel where you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar. You should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen, for those who've not been involved in NQA webinars before, or any webinars, you should be able to see a number of boxes, one of which should have questions on there. If at any time you wish to ask a question, then please type in there and I'll do my best to get back to you. The maximum time we've got for the webinar is 1 hour. As I say, I'm hoping to speak for about 35, 40 minutes, and that should give us at least 15 minutes towards the end to pick up on any questions. If a question arrives at the time that I'm still on the subject, I may try and answer it there and then, but don't forget to get your questions in there. Also, if at any time after the event you feel that you've any questions to ask that you forgot to ask at the time, you can always email me, and I'll mention this again at the end, but it's richard.walsh, that's W-A-L-S-H, at nqa.com, richard.walsh@nqa.com. So we're going to be having a look a little bit about ESOS, what it is, where it's come from, and the phases of ESOS. We are now into the second phase of ESOS. We're going to have a look at 50001, look at the structure of it, and also look at, as I said, an opportunity for some questions towards the end. So what is ESOS? It is the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. And in the UK, it's covered by ESOS Regulation 2014. So it is on the statute books. It is a piece of UK government legislation. What it has done is put into UK law Article 8 of the European Union Energy Efficiency Directive. So it's not one of those pieces of legislation that's going to disappear if we go through with Brexit, if we leave the EU. It is on the UK statute books, and for the time being at least, it will remain on the statute books. So those people that were hoping it might disappear are going to be disappointed. It applies to large organisations, and it uses the European Union definition of a large organisation. So that's an organisation that employs at least 250 people, has a turnover in excess of 50 million euros and a balance sheet in excess of 43 million euros, and is not a public sector body. And there are some conditions that apply to that. By public sector body, we also mean a body that may be a private sector company but has a significant public sector contract. If you fall into that, if you speak to us, speak to myself, I can give you further guidance, but it gets a little bit complicated when we start looking at percentages of the work that you're doing and whether it's public sector or private sector. So really, if you employ at least 250 people and have that sort of turnover, then you are in the ESOS net, if you like. So where are we on the ESOS phases? Phase 1 has been and gone. So there are a number of people who didn't comply, and we'll look at what happens to those who don't comply in a short while. But phase 1, the qualification date, that's the date at which we look at, or the government looks at, whether you fall into the right category, is set now at the 31st of December 2018. Previously it was 31st of December 2014. The 4-year compliance phase is now between, we're in the middle of that now. In fact, we're coming towards the end of that. We're getting towards the between the 6th of December 15 and the 5th of December 2019. And the final compliance date by which you have to have complied via a number of measures is the 5th of December 2019. And as far as we are aware, and this is again official UK government guidance, there will be a phase 3, which again will be, funnily enough, in 4 years' time, which will have a qualification date of the 31st of December 2022. So what actually is it? ESOS is a mandatory energy assessment and energy saving identification scheme. Sounds very nice, sounds very friendly. It's an energy savings opportunity scheme. And it does what it says on the tin. It's an assessment that allows you to identify energy savings in the way that you carry out your work. It requires that you measure your total energy consumption. It requires that you conduct energy audits to identify cost-effective energy efficiency recommendations, and that you report your compliance to the Environment Agency if you're in the UK, and I have a slide later on that talks about if you're in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland. But again, it would go to the relevant SEPA, for instance, in Scotland. So that's basically what it requires you to do. And it's not an option. You can't think, oh, well, I've got my energy house in order. I don't need to do anything about that. There's nothing I can learn. You still have to carry out this process and formally report. Is there a benefit? They say there is. I firmly believe there is. It has been suggested that estimates, on average, save between 5 and 10% of energy consumption by carrying out this process and fully taking through the recommendations that come out of the energy report. So between 5 and 10%, I've seen figures of approaching 20%, but I think they were starting from a fairly low baseline. So somewhere between 5 and 10% of energy consumption should be readily achievable. Now, a couple of questions that have already come through. Is it the same in Ireland? Ireland, well, the whole of Europe has to comply with this article of the EU Energy Directive. So yes, there will be something similar in Ireland. It may not be called ESOS. In fact, I don't think it is called ESOS, but there is a very similar scheme in Ireland. I was assessing just before Christmas in Sweden, and there is a similar scheme in Sweden. So all of these EU countries all have a similar scheme in place, called something different, obviously, to ESOS. The second question, just quickly I'll go through. It is complicated for the public sector. Universities, I know quite a bit about universities, having worked with a number of them over the past few months. Generally, universities are exempt from having to comply with ESOS because they are looking at, generally they have a public sector contract. Somebody's asked the question where the estimates 5 and 10% of energy savings figure come from. Those are government figures. I'm not a party to where they've got those from. I've taken that directly from a number of sources. Some of the sources talk about as low as 1%. Some talk about as high as 15 to 20%. I've tended to take a view down the middle and taken off the highest and the lowest estimates. And from my experience, and I've worked with probably now well into double figures of companies carrying out, not ESOS assessments, but we'll look at ISO 50001 in a short while, but people who've been going down this road have clearly saved between 5 and 10% on energy costs. So I'm quite comfortable in quoting those figures. Right. Moving on, there's a couple of more questions. We'll come back to those shortly. The UK government have estimated that if all the people who are compliant or need to comply actually put this into effect, then the cost savings across the UK could be somewhere between maybe £1 and £3 billion by 2030. So we're not talking about small sums of money. It's quite large sums that we're looking at. Obviously, reducing energy usage will also reduce and lower carbon emissions. It's not a carbon management standard. The standard requires that you report the amount of energy that you're using in kilowatt hours or in joules. However, there is a direct correlation between using less energy and a carbon reduction. So therefore, it will help to work towards carbon reduction. And of course, if you're saving money and taking money from your bottom line, it has the potential to increase competitiveness and also to look at showing and demonstrating to your customers that you're taking energy management and sustainable development responsible. I'll keep popping back to the questions. Am I aware of anything relevant to South Africa? I'm not personally. Obviously, South Africa is well outside the European Union. I don't think that ESOS applies to South Africa. However, the standard, the international standard, we're going to have a look at, ISO 50001 clearly does. That can be applied anywhere in the UK. We do have a member of staff based in South Africa if you wish to make contact, and if you email me, I can put you in touch and you can have a more in-depth discussion about maybe how that can help. One other question, we have completed phase 1. Do we then have to reassess for phase 2, 3, 4 and so on? I'm afraid you do. You can't just submit the same report. I expect what a lot of people will do will be to take the report off the shelf, blow the dust off it and update it. But sadly, you do have to submit a new report using a registered auditor at each time. And does it apply to EU companies operating outside the EU? Yes, it does. And my understanding there is that when you're looking at the amount of energy you use, if they have sites that are outside of the European Union, as far as ESOS is concerned, you only report on what is used within the EU. But if you're operating in the EU, operating in a number of countries, then your UK operations will have to comply with ESOS, providing your UK element meets the requirements of 250 staff and the turnover that we talked about. What if you don't? Of course, there are penalties. So failure to declare the compliance on time. Now, not wishing to give you a way out, but the deadline was extended for phase 1 because there was a number of reasons why people didn't make the deadline on time. But technically, failure to declare compliance in time is a one-off, £5,000 fine plus £500 per working day, up to a maximum of 80 days. So technically, that could cost you £45,000 fine if you don't comply. If you don't maintain adequate records, so if you are not able to provide evidence of your energy usage, that's a £5,000 fixed penalty. And a total failure to comply at all. So if you just sit there and hope the whole thing goes away and don't engage or do anything, that's a £50,000 fine plus £500 a day until resolution with no cap on it. If you get an enforcement notice to say that you should have complied and you haven't, again, £5,000 per £500 per working day, again, with no upper limit. And falsification, so just finding somebody else's report and banging it in and hoping that nobody notices that it's not yours, up to £50,000 fine. And in all of those cases, publication, there are lists. You can search for people who've not complied, and you can go in and there are lists of people for whom these fines and these penalties are a reality. So it's not going to go away, not at all. Right, I will take some of these questions as we go along. So if we became ESOS eligible since 2015, what are our obligations? Your obligations, if we go back to, I'm not going to go back, I'm not going to move the slides back, but the qualification date for phase 2 is the 31st of December 2018. So if you qualify on that day, New Year's Eve this year, so whatever your turnover, whatever period you're in, whatever annual period you're in, if your turnover that year will comply and you have more than 250 staff on the 31st of December, then you will comply and your obligations are everything I'm talking about. If you don't comply on that day, if you comply up to the day before, not suggesting this is a strategy you should use, but if you were complying the day before and then decide to just fire half of your staff so that you've less than 250 staff on the 31st, then you wouldn't have an obligation. But I think that's a very harsh way of getting out of it. So yes, if you comply, if you have the necessary requirements on the 31st of December this year, then you're in. It's as simple as that. What qualifications are required to be regarded as a qualified auditor for ESOS? I wasn't really going to go into that. That's a whole separate element. If you search for ESOS assessors, they are listed. You do have to have a very good understanding of energy management techniques, of energy systems, and have to be a registered energy assessor. You can't just decide that it's something you're going to do yourself out of your bedroom. So if you really are interested, again, if you speak to me some other time, or if you just search online for ESOS energy assessors, that will give you all that you need to know. So there's a number of ways of complying. And the first way is, as the original intention was, which was to carry out an ESOS energy audit. And an ESOS energy audit has to cover all energy users, and there's a slight caveat on that, which I'll explain in a second. So it's to cover all of your energy users, buildings, industrial processes, and transport. Now, when we talk about all energy users, a little bit like in ISO 14001, where the standard particularly asks you to look at significant environmental aspects. 50001 asks you to look at significant energy uses. So therefore, you only have to cover 90% of your energy use. So when we talk about covering all energy uses, it has to be 90% minimum. So you can therefore ignore odd little bits. I've seen people in the past that were worried about counting mobile phone chargers and calculators and little bits and pieces like that. You can forget about all of that. It is significant energy usage, and that figure is 90%. Where do we get the data from? You can draw the data from existing energy compliance efficiency, energy efficiency compliance activities. So you may already have looked at some elements of this. You may have already started to collect information. You will all have energy bills that you can look at. You can use existing energy auditing or measurement activities. So it may be that you're complying with the Carbon Trust standard. I know the Carbon Trust are particularly keen on ESOS energy audits. They can help you. They have registered auditors. You may be compliant to a Carbon Trust standard for energy management. That will have a lot of the information you need in it. However you manage it, they must, however, be carried out in a way that meets the minimum requirements for ESOS audits. You can do most of it yourself. However, the report must be viewed and signed off as complete by a registered ESOS assessor. So you don't have to apply, you don't have to use an ESOS assessor to do the whole thing. You can just present a report and they will in effect audit the compliance of that report and look at how you gather the data and make sure, if you like, that the data is relevant and valid. There's a couple of other ways that can work. I've not come across anybody that's used either of these next two, but according to the regs, these are also compliance options. Display energy certificates. These sit alongside energy performance certificates. You've probably seen them on some public buildings when you walk in. They look very much like the stickers that you get on fridges and freezers and ovens and cars these days that tell you how much energy they actually use. I have a slight issue with this because display energy certificates are only legally required by organisations in the public sector, and if you're in the public sector you don't have to comply with ESOS. So quite why you can use display energy certificates, I'm not so sure, unless you've gone down the route of using display energy certificates on a voluntary manner. However, it is a low cost assessment, not particularly expensive to have an assessment done for display energy certificate. However, they only use or they only refer to building energy use. They don't refer to anything that happens within the building. So they are only looking at building energy use, heating, lighting, lifts, and things like IT that might be used. Anything that you use in the building for a process, be there machines, anything that's using energy at all, they're outside the scope of display energy certificates. And of course, you might require some additional assessment for carrying out those activities within the building. They will not include non-building use of energy, so anything like transport, vehicles, anything carried out off-site, maybe installation activities, service activities that you carry out, that will not be included in a display energy certificate. And as I said, they tend to be only in place in public buildings. They're not the same as EPCs. Energy performance certificates only relate to the buildings themselves, whereas a display energy certificate does look at the usage that goes on with it within the building. I'm just going to stop as we keep going through and looking at a couple of questions. Do I think there is a problem with cowboy ESOS assessors and consultants? Perish the thought, but I'm sure there is. I've come across some consultants over the years that I may not go as far as calling them cowboys, but I would certainly question their ability to offer the advice that they're offering. I've seen large private sector organisations use a sample of decks to meet ESOS, and ESOS assessors that will sign it off for a fee. That's fine, but you do that at your own risk. I wouldn't advocate it. and certainly the Environment Agency, if they chose to, and I accept it's on the sampling basis, if they chose to dig a little bit further, then I think you take that route at your own risk. Finally, another way of carrying this out is Green Deal assessments. Green Deal assessments are carried out under a government scheme, and non-domestic Green Deal assessments, GDAs, are bespoke assessments that take into account a building occupant's specific energy use. The Energy Performance Certificate and Display Energy Certificate data is also used towards these, but again, it's restricted to building energy use, heating, lighting, cooling, ventilation, hot water, refrigeration, blah, 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 and again, does not cover energy used in industrial processes. So these last two options, or the second two options, display energy certificates and Green Deal assessments, will possibly help you gather some information in terms of your business and how the business uses its building, but certainly won't help you with the process. Finally, and if I'm honest, the method that I would always recommend, ISO 50001 certification. So ISO 50001 is a standard that's been around for a number of years now, approaching, what, 7 years. It's been described as the energy version of ISO 14001, and to a certain extent that is correct. And if you are certified to ISO 50001 with a UCAS accredited certification body, and I will stress that at a number of points during this webinar, the non-UCAS accredited bodies in the UK are not acceptable. If you're outside of the UK, if you're in a European Union country, and it's a body of your own national accreditation body. So again, if you're in Sweden, for instance, and it's SWEDAC, then that is quite acceptable as well. But you have to use an accredited certification body. I'm not going to mention the non-accreditation bodies. I've done that once before and got myself into a bit of trouble. But I think we all know who they are. If you use any of those, their certification will not be accepted, and you will have wasted your money with them and find yourself paying a fine. So 50001 certification, it's basically, as I said, the energy version of 14001. So it talks about providing a framework for organisations to develop a policy for the more efficient use of energy. It asks for the setting of targets and objectives to meet that policy, enables us to use data to better measure the results, make decisions about energy use, review how well the policy works, but ultimately continually improve our energy performance. Now, the difference between complying using 50001 and complying using an ESOS report, if all you're after is a quick fix, a quick tick in the box, then an ESOS assessment will do that. It will give you a report. You submit it to the Environment Agency if you're in England. They tick their box. You've complied. You can put it on the shelf and forget about it for 4 years. 4 years' time, it comes round again. And as I might have said earlier, you take it off the shelf, blow the dust off it, get it updated and resubmit it. Now, that's fine. And that's fine if all you're bothered about is basic legal compliance. It achieves nothing. And to me, you're wasting your time. But if that's how you within your business drives the business, who am I to say differently? 50001, of course, requires continual improvement. We're going to have a look at that in a short while, because I know there's been some issues around 50001. But 50001 will ensure that you are actually doing something about those recommendations. You're putting those recommendations into practice. You are improving your energy performance. So what is it? Unlike 14001, it's a data-oriented management system. So predominantly 50001 is looking at how you're handling energy data. I audit 14,001, I audit 50,001. 14,001 is much more tangible. I'm outside, I'm looking in skips, I'm looking at how people impact on the environment. There is an element of that in 50,001, but a greater part of the assessment is looking at spreadsheets, looking at how people document and report their energy usage. But basically, it looks at two areas of management. Evaluation of energy performance using the standard calls them ENPIs. Now that's just the posh way of calling them a KPI. It's energy performance indicators, ENPIs, and also management of the system itself, just as you would if you've got ISO 9001 or 14,001. And of course, as with all of the standards, all management standards, it follows the plan, do, check, act process. So where did it come from? As usual, as we did with ISO 14,001 with that predecessor, which was British Standard 7750, as we did with ISO 9001 with its predecessor 5750, we had the world's first energy management standard, which was British Standard 16,001. That was published in 2009. And that, again, looked at implementation of an energy policy, identifying current and planned energy consumption, introducing a monitoring system, and then measuring energy consumption and working towards reducing consumption or improvement in energy performance. ISO obviously thought it was a good idea, and hot on its heels in 2011, in fact the 15th of June 2011, ISO 50001 was published. And I won't dwell on this slide. You've seen it before. If you've opened up any of the modern management standards, you'll see that it follows that exact same flow: plan, do, check, act. So, if you already hold certification to ISO 14001, then the basic framework is already there. Now, remember, it follows the same structure as other management systems. And again, I have a bit of a caveat here. ISO 14001 and ISO 9001 are now at their 2015 issues. The old versions, the 2004 and 2008 versions for 14 and 9000, are valid for another 8 months or so to the middle of September, the 14th of September. They will then disappear. 50,001 certification, 50,001 as a standard at the moment is still in the same format as the old 14,001. It's currently being rewritten, and it is anticipated that the 2018 version of 50,001 that will comply with the new, what they call Annex L, and we'll look at that in a short while, that will be out before Christmas. They are aiming for a November, December launch of the new standard. Right, what would I recommend? I'm just going back to the questions again. Would you recommend a standalone management system or integrated to 14,001? Well, that's very, very pertinent to what I'm just talking about. I would always recommend it be integrated into a 14,001 system. They are basically doing the same thing. The only differences being, instead of having significant environmental aspects, you have significant energy uses. So significant aspects are prioritized based on their impact on the environment. As I said, 50,001 is a data management system, so therefore your significant energy uses are the processes you have that use most energy. So basically the process is almost the same, and with a couple of minor examples, we're going to go through that shortly. I would always recommend a fully integrated system. So as I've just said, the current 50,001 is not in this Annex SL format. That was the format on which all the new standards are based. But as I've said, a rewrite is ongoing, due for publication later on this year. And at that point, it will be fully compatible with 9001 and 14,001, the 2015 versions. So, is it the right approach for me? One of the questions that people have asked me is, if I've already got 14,001, why do I need it? Well, 14,001, if you're using this as a compliance tool for ESOS, 14,001 certification does not meet that requirement. I believe on some countries on the continent it does, providing that the 14,001 system contains some additional information looking at energy usage. But in the UK, 14,001 certification is not acceptable if you're using it for ESOS compliance. So can't 14,001 cover it? That's what I've been asked. For ESOS compliance, no. You could, if all you were doing was using this to measure energy usage and energy improvement. If energy was one of your significant impacts, of course you're going to manage it. However, if it's right for you and your organisation, or should I say it is right for you and your organisation, if you want to take control of the way that you actually manage your energy. And remember, it's a data-based standard, and it manages the related costs more effectively than if you were using 14,001 on their own. And it's particularly beneficial for organisations who've got a significant energy expenditure. 14,001 compliance with ESOS will ensure continual improvement in energy performance and not just a quick fix. And that's the point I would make to people who talk about should I use 50,001 rather than just an ESOS audit. When should I start 50,001 if I have 14,001 standard? Well, the compliance date, if we go back to that table again that I showed, I'm not going to go back physically. The compliance date for the phase 2 of ESOS is the 5th of December 2019. So you've got the best part of 2 years to present a 50,001 certificate from a UCAS accredited certification body to the Environment Agency or SEPA or Natural Resources Wales. So how long do you think that will take? It depends how big a business you are. I reckon if you've already got 14,001, you can successfully start from scratch and have a system in place fully certified within 9 to 12 months. All I would countenance that with is one of the reasons that they extended the deadline date for ESOS compliance at phase 1 was because there was a sudden rush of people all wanting certification to 50,001 at the very last minute. And we as a certification industry couldn't cope with the demand because everybody had left it to the last minute. So if I were you, I think so long as you start within the next 6 months and aim for completion by spring, summer 2019, you should sail through. Now, continual improvement, what's it all about? I am very, very conscious that there has been a number of papers produced by a couple of consultants, one in particular, again, who shall remain nameless, who's tried to question this term continual improvement and tried to use it to suggest that 50,001 is not the best way forward to achieve ESOS compliance, and has been quite, I'm going to use the word naughty before I say anything too bad about them, in terms of trying to create a false impression, I suspect, to try and sell their own services on ESOS audits and also maybe to sell some training. So one of the things that they were trying to claim was that this requirement for continual improvement is a new requirement that's been sneaked in under the radar. All of the new standards, 9,001, 14,001, the new 45,001 health and safety standard that's due to be launched next month, they all require an element of continual improvement. That is the reason for having them. All of the standards, including 50,001, state that they are there to achieve continual improvement. Where some of this information has come from is a new standard that came out a couple of years ago now that applies to us as a certification body, which is ISO 50003. And that presents us some new requirements for us as certification bodies carrying out 50001 assessments. So it doesn't apply to you, but it gives us some additional guidance. And the biggest one, the one that is causing the most heartache at the moment, is it has redefined a major non-conformance to include a lack of continuous improvement or continual improvement. So if at an audit you're not better than you were the year before, then according to the standard, that has to be a major non-conformance. And a major non-conformance could put your certification at risk, and therefore you would not comply with ESOS. But that is a very, very, very worst case scenario, and one that we would never get to. The things I point out to everybody, the standard is talking about energy performance and not absolute energy use, and they are not the same thing. What is paramount is that performance indicators are used correctly and are appropriate for your situation. And performance indicators take into account known or planned fluctuations, things like the weather, obviously that can affect heating and cooling, production levels, staff changes, customer requirements, etc., etc. And there's a slide a little bit later on looking purely at that issue. That's a slide I've used in other presentations that just shows the Annex SL structure. Okay, 50001. Does it have to cover all energy usage? So this is now where we're getting into the meat of the standard, if you like. 50001 can do, but it doesn't have to. So it's your choice. You decide the scope of the system, you decide on the boundaries, just as you do with ISO 14001, just as you do with ISO 9001. So you decide on what it covers in terms of buildings, processes and transport. However, the standard requires that all significant energy usage is included. So you can rule out areas that maybe are not classed as significant uses of energy, just in the same way that under 14001 your scope can exclude areas that don't have a significant environmental impact. However, if you're using it for ESOS compliance, it must cover 90% of all energy use within the building. And if it doesn't, then other routes to compliance must also be used to cover that shortfall. A much shorter energy assessment, use of some of the other tools that we talked about earlier on, display energy certificates, Green Deal assessments, etc., etc. However, most of the 50001 certificates I've worked with cover all of the energy use. So why does ISO 50001 benefit you over just having a quick and simple ESOS audit? 50001 requires you to have real reductions in your energy use. It's the primary focus of 50001, and it improves and will drive you towards having to improve your energy performance. Ask you to move beyond what we term the low-hanging fruit. So that's just the quick wins, the things that I'm sure we can all achieve by getting people to turn off lights, turning down the heating, turning off machines when they're not being used. 50001 also helps us work towards carbon reductions, not the primary function of 50001, but there is some correlation. Cost reduction will provide reductions in energy costs straight off the bottom line, and evidence shows, and I will stake my reputation on the line here. I'm not allowed to give you details of other companies' facts and figures, but I will state that generally evidence shows that in year one alone, cost savings outweigh the cost of implementation, and that's just in year one. I'm sure there'll be somebody who's listening in, maybe the same person that asked me to prove that savings of between 5 and 10% were achievable. Maybe there's some doubting Thomases out there, but generally, I am happy to state that in year one alone, the cost savings will outweigh the cost of implementation. The main difference between 50001 and an ESOS audit then is also employee engagement. ESOS itself doesn't really engage your employees. They might see somebody walking around with some measuring equipment and a clipboard and a pen, taking readings and looking at things, but generally an ESOS audit does not engage employees. A formal management system does. It offers shape and structure to what's happening. It coordinates all your activities, captures all the improvements and initiatives going on, and it identifies energy-specific training requirements. Looks at benchmarking and reporting. 50001 requires that you set a baseline. So you take a 12-month set of figures, usually taking that information from existing readings, existing bills that you've got, set a baseline. This is where we start from. This is our starting point, and that allows us then to monitor our progress, track our improvements over time using whatever data sets we choose that are suitable for our business, and also provides us with information, certified information, because obviously an assessor like myself is coming in and looking at that. It's including information that can then be used with a knowledge that it's correct and can be used then in broader sustainability reports. 50001, yes, of course, also gives you this additional regulatory compliance. It certainly covers ESOS, as we've just been talking about, but it also helps you identify and evaluate compliance against any other relevant energy legislation, just as 14001 asks you to identify and comply with environmental legislation. And finally, company reputation. Having a quick and easy ESOS audit doesn't really do much to enhance your reputation. To me, it shows that you're trying to get away with the bare minimum. You're not really that bothered about improving. You're just ticking a box and send it off and sit tight for 4 years till it comes round again. Certification demonstrates commitment to real improvement and not just a quick fix. And I think it's especially suitable when it's sat alongside 14001. A lot of my clients have 14001 and 50001. They don't compete with each other, they're complementary to each other. And it shows that your organisation is a leader in sustainable development. There's around 2,000 50001 certificates issued now in the UK. I believe we have about 10 to 12% of the of the world total, but in the UK about 2,000. Right, many auditors insist that we need to demonstrate improvement in energy consumption and not performance, and want to see reduction in energy year on year. How should we tackle the auditor in this case? Show them the standard. Show them the standard that says it's energy performance. Show them the definition at the front that says it's energy performance. Show them my presentation. Question their ability to audit 50001 and formally complain to their certification body through their complaints process. If an auditor, if a 50001 auditor is asking you to show a reduction in energy use and not energy performance, they are wrong. And you should complain in the strongest possible terms to their certification body and tell the assessor at the time and tell them that they don't know what they're talking about. It's all in the standard itself, and the standard defines energy performance. Is there a requirement to meet a significant energy uses, or can estimates be used? Sadly, you need to meter incoming energy. So you will all have meters looking at the amount of energy that comes onto site. Where we start to then maybe develop over time is the use of sub-metering. At the start, estimates are often used to look at how the whole amount of energy is used across the business. So by looking at the capacity of motors, the capacity of machines, the plates on the side of machines, you can get an idea as to how much energy a machine uses, and you can use those to work towards setting up this energy baseline and the energy review. Gradually over time, as with anything else, as you want to measure things more accurately, you might then have to start looking at either sub-metering or using what are called clamp-on meters, where you can put a meter around a piece of cable and it will give you direct energy readings. I'll speak for about 40-45 minutes. As always, I'm starting to run over. However, I'm asking all the questions as we're going along. So we're doing okay at the moment. So plan, do, check, act. That's what the standard is. It follows the Deming cycle, as all of the standards do. So plan, what do we need in the plan phase? The current standard requires that you have an energy manager in place to oversee the process. In the new standard, certainly in the first draft that is now available of the new standard, the requirement for a formal energy manager has gone, but there is still a requirement for an energy team. A little bit like you would have in health and safety, where you might have a health and safety committee, there is a formal requirement for an energy team. We set up this initial baseline, so this is where we are in a particular year. It's for you to set the year, it's entirely up to you, and we look at how much energy has been used in that particular year and where it was used. And the baseline is against which all judgments are made in terms of continual improvement going forward. We need to think about the performance indicators that we use. They're measures of energy, measures of energy usage, and are normalized. And we'll look at that in a minute. And ENPIs are increasingly important to take into account known fluctuations. One or two of the companies I've been into who on the face of it appear to show a worsening of energy performance and could be heading towards a major non-conformance, when we've sat down and reevaluated their performance indicators and looked at something more suitable that can take into account fluctuations in production, we find that actually the right measurements will allow still a reduction in performance to be shown, or an improvement in performance, should I say. You then have to create the energy review, how you intend to improve energy, as I say, where it's used, how and where it's used, what are we going to do going forward to actually improve our energy performance, and we have to document an energy policy. Plan, do, check, act. Do, we set objectives. There have to be a set of objectives set into place. It's still, this standard still refers to objectives and targets, so we need to think about what actions are we going to take to meet those targets and set up some sort of a structured framework through the creation of action plans. What do we need in terms of resources, responsibilities, and in particular time frame, and what is our achievement criteria? So how do we know when we've achieved our target? We think about planning specific operational and maintenance activities, maybe to make sure that machines are running efficiently and effectively, and communicate to employees so that everybody understands their roles in helping achieve energy reduction and meeting requirements of the policy. Checking, these last two phases are very similar to an existing 14,001. So we're checking that actions carried out are carried out properly, effectively. The system remains effective, remains relevant to what we're doing through the use of regular audits. Is the system delivering what it should do, and that the significant processes are monitored and measured? We're checking against previous results and making sure that continual improvement is in place. And above all, making sure that we've got procedures in place to review and action any areas of non-conformance. And finally, management review process. This is the same as any other standard, with one exception. Obviously, you've got the word energy in rather than environment or quality, but generally the bit at the bottom, projected energy performance for the following period. You have to try and forecast for the following year what your energy performance is going to be. And again, that's not, and I repeat, not how much energy you're going to use. If you've selected the right performance indicators, then it is looking at the amount of energy you're going to use per member of staff, per square meter of space, per production unit. That's what we're talking about. So 50,001 key elements. What does it do? It requires an energy audit. It requires an energy review. It requires you setting an energy baseline. It requires establishment of energy objectives and targets. You have to establish an action plan that's then implemented, check and improve performance, monitor, document, and then report on all of the above. So, again, we've already touched on this. I'm just going to drive it home yet again. Feel free to print off any of these slides and wave them under the nose of your assessor. If it's an NQA assessor, by the way, put them in touch with me. Ask them there and then to call me. Ask them to call Richard Walsh, because my responsibility is to ensure that our assessors are giving the right information and looking at the right things. So if it's an NQA assessor that's telling you that it's absolute energy usage and not energy performance, ask that they ring me immediately. If it's not an NQA assessor and one from one of the other certification bodies, then formally complain. So the standard does require continual improvement, but it is not a new requirement. Improvement in energy performance, not absolute energy usage. There is no fixed level of improvement. So long as the numbers are better than they were the previous year, that is all that matters. And the key to this, the key is getting the right performance indicators. And a performance indicator is a quantitative measure of energy performance. Can be established to cover any level of your organisation. It could be the whole organisation that's covered, or a specific function, a specific piece of equipment, a system or a process. And energy performance indicators are measured values, ratios, or models that your organisation accepts as meaningful representations of energy performance. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it's for you to decide what those performance indicators are. And they're typically established in one of three forms. So it could be a single metric, it could be consumption. So for instance, a lot of businesses I work with purely look at for car use, will look at the litres of fuel that is used. Some will look at a ratio. When we get into the ratio, to take that same example, the ratio is miles to the gallon or kilometres per litre, whether you work in imperial or metric. It could be kilowatt hours per metre squared. So you could look at the area of your business and look at the amount of energy that's used. So that's quite often used to measure lighting and heating. It could be kilowatt hours per unit of production. How many kilowatt hours are taken to produce a widget? How many kilowatt hours are taken to produce a kilogram of product? In the food industry, that's quite often used. They'll take a kilogram of product going out the door and look at the amount of energy that's used to manufacture that kilogram of product. Or it could be a numerical model that actually accounts for relevant variables. One or two of my clients have fairly complicated performance indicators that take into account both of the above, that then are fed into a spreadsheet that comes out then with the performance improvement. So what isn't it? What is ISO 50001 not? It's not prescriptive. There are certain things it tells you you have to do, but it doesn't tell you how you have to do it. You have to have a baseline. You have to carry out an energy review. You have to set performance indicators. It doesn't necessarily reflect specific regulatory requirements. It asks you to meet those requirements, but it doesn't tell you what they are. So the standard is valid the world over. It doesn't matter whether you're working under UK legislation, USA legislation, South African legislation, whatever. It doesn't reflect individual local regulatory requirements. It's valid in whatever country you are operating in. All it asks you is that you know what those regulations are. It requires energy efficiency to be taken into account as part of the purchasing process. So when you're buying new machinery, when you're considering changing processes, it asks you to look at the energy efficiency of what you're buying, but it doesn't make any specific specifications. It asks you to consider and choose the best energy option. 50001 isn't an energy management plan. It asks you to work towards having that in place so that you know what energy you're using, where you're using it, and how you're going to improve. But the standard itself is not an energy management plan. It doesn't provide processes for technical assessment of plant systems and procedures. So it won't tell you how efficient your ovens are working. It won't tell you how efficient your motors are. But it, again, will ask you to do that as part of the process, but it doesn't provide the process itself for doing that. And it requires that you carry out an energy review and an energy audit, but it doesn't dictate how you do it. It's entirely up to you. We're now down towards the last couple of slides, so I'm going to put out a last call for questions because we are now within about 5 minutes to go. I make it bang on 4 o'clock. So last couple of things to run through. A summary. We're now in phase 2 of the compliance scheme. Organisations were required to submit information for phase 1 by 2016, December 2016. I should say December, not January 2016. The regulations require UK organisations to take 3 important steps to meet this compliance date of the 5th of December. Measure the total energy consumption for buildings, industrial process and transport. Conduct audits to identify cost-effective energy efficiency recommendations, and report their compliance to their national scheme administrator, the Environment Agency in England, SEPA in Scotland, the NIEA, Northern Ireland Environment Agency in Northern Ireland, and Natural Resources Wales in Wales. To comply with the regulations, a lead energy assessor, a registered lead energy assessor, will need to carry out or verify the ESOS assessment. The period of data collection must include the qualification date of the 31st of December. So if you're going to take a year's worth of energy readings, you could start collecting that data now, but somewhere within that 12-month period, the 31st of December 2018 has to be in there. So you can start now. I would recommend that you move forward to thinking about implementing ISO 50001. Many of those who carried out ESOS assessments at phase 1 are now implementing 50001. So those who did a quick audit at phase 1 have now decided, and there's some very, very big household names that are looking at it, and we ourselves are speaking to a number of very, very well-known businesses, very, very well-known household names that are now deciding that 50001 is the way forward. If this is your route, you've got until the 5th of December 2019 to achieve compliance and to submit a certification, and it must be with a UCAS accredited certification body. We are, and what you're looking for is that tick. So unless there's anybody else with any questions, there's a couple that have just come in that I'm just going to answer. Excuse me. If you need to disappear, I'm conscious to have run over by about 5 minutes. If you need to disappear, then I accept that, and thank you for your time. Thank you for putting up with us. Thank you for listening. Any further information, richard.walsh@nqa.com. I'll just answer these last 2 questions. Where do you register with as a lead auditor? I don't know. I don't think ERCA actually do energy assessing. I think IEMA might do, and certainly the Institute of Energy Management, they do. But again, if you look that up, if you look, as I said, as a piece of advice earlier on, if you use any search engine and ask for ESOS assessor, and all the information will be there. Finally, we only have to comply with one regulatory body if we have premises in all 3 countries. That is correct. What I would advise is wherever your head office is, that is where you would comply. So if your head office is in Scotland, but you happen to have sites in Wales and Northern Ireland, you would submit everything to SEPA. So it's wherever your head office is based. That is where I think technically you can actually comply with any of them, but I would take that route. Thank you. I see the few people thanking me for my time as well. Hope you have found it useful. Certainly a few people are. Just to reiterate, you will get a copy of the slides and you will get a link to a recording of this webinar. So if you're so inclined, you can sit and listen to it all again at some point. If I haven't answered any questions, richard.walsh@nqa.com. Thanks a lot for your time, and I wish you well in whichever direction you choose for the future. Thanks and good afternoon.